being able to just give somebody money and I get all the metrics that I care about in a really easy to digest manner. And then they're also pushing features out and doing all these things where it's like, I don't have to worry about that. That was kind of the big switch flip for me, where it's like, at a certain point, you need to concentrate on the highest value activity. And it wasn't rolling my own data studio, figuring out why Supermetrics broke, like all these things like that. I was like, dude, I'll just give Triple Whale money and it'll be fine.
What is up, Modern Commerce listeners? I want to show you an amazing app we've been using called Triple Whale. You can check it out at trytriplewhale.com. It has all of the business health metrics and growth metrics you could possibly need all in one place, right? So everybody can get on the same page. This has revolutionized our ability to help grow brands and collaborate with brands. Everyone can get on the same page on the most important metrics. So if you're a media buyer, you can come into this and you can just use this little pin icon right here, and you can pin to the top the most important stuff to you. So if I'm a media buyer, I might have ROAS, I might have ad spend, I might have new customer ROAS, right? But if I'm an owner, maybe those things aren't as important to me. Maybe I just want, net profit, show me the net profit, show me the sales, right? Show me the number of orders. So everyone on the team can get in line, get, on the same page of what the most important growth metrics are, because it's different for every brand. So grab Triple Whale at trytriplewhale.com. Use it. I promise you it will make your growth path far more clear. And enjoy this episode of Modern Commerce.
Hey, Modern Commerce. Welcome back. We're at it again. John and I here with a special guest. I'll let John go ahead and pick his brain for the most part today. They've already had a great conversation on his podcast. They'll get to that in just a little bit. But we have Rabah Rahil with us today. John, go ahead and take it away for me.
Yes, and we'll for sure link, kind of give you suggestion to the Triple Whale podcast. What is it? Sorry, you have the name. It's the name of it, right? What's the name of it?
You're Not Your ROAS.
You're Not Your ROAS, which is a great name. And I'm so upset that I forgot it.
You can't be messing up another man's podcast.
I know.
Name, John.
We should just restart this.
What's this one called? Commerce Modern.
Commerce Modern. Those guys' podcast.
Yeah.
So You're Not Your ROAS. We will link to it in the show notes. We'll link probably Casey. I don't know. It's up to Casey, but we'll link to it. And you should for sure check it out. Rabah gets some great guests. But Rabah, so excited to have you on. And I will let you introduce yourself, maybe but this is like a fun way to start. Start with just something weird about you, or that people not your professional, oh yeah, I started here and then I did this and that's how everybody does it, right? Just tell us something freaking weird about you.
Well, actually, this is something we connect on in terms of running. In a previous life, I was actually the freshman of the year in my conference for cross country. So I used to be a lot skinnier and a lot faster than I am now.
In college, you were the freshman of the year.
Yeah. In the conference, in our conference. Yeah. So I went from the pinnacle and then it was all downhill from there. Started popped my freshman year and run. As you know, John, running it's a challenging sport, especially if you kind of went semi-pro, so that's cool. But I did not go pro and I ended up quitting because it was so much work in university as well. And I wasn't good enough to make money from it. And so, but yeah, that's kind of a little fun fact for me. I used to be a very, very proficient mid-distance to distance runner.
Yeah. And I also was many pounds ago. But that's a random one that maybe some of the people who watch our show don't know, but cool.
Sketcher sponsored as well. Don't sandbag yourself. Sketcher sponsored. I never got sponsored.
Right. Yeah. I signed that Skechers deal.
For the record, I also ran cross country, but I was never skinny, nor was I any good at it. So
Casey was all right. He was all right for a casual runner.
I'm more of a short burst, quickness kind of guy, not so much that endurance athlete. I'm gonna let you guys run that race. I'll run a 30-second version and then go get a hot dog or something.
Yeah, I was going to say, you go to the races for the beers afterwards, right?
That's it.
Did you see did you see the interview in the Pro Bowl with the punter who was I got what did he say? He's I took 2 snaps, got 2 halftime hot dogs. Favorite stat line I've ever had.
That's my kind of stat line.
That was Casey as a distance runner.
Missed opportunity.
Cross country is a co-ed sport, and there was a reason Casey participated.
We did travel with the girls. It was nice.
Yeah. So okay, now let's get into all right, let's talk about things people are here to listen about. We could do a whole podcast about running, and nobody would listen. Because nobody really cares about it. Sorry if you're sorry to all my friends who are still running, but
no judgment.
they know, everybody knows. So yeah, tell me your background of like kind of your marketer's journey. You know, you don't have to start at like day one, I was born, but like maybe when you kind of came on this path as a marketer, as a e-com person. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So basically the elevator pitch for me was, I ran for 2 years at school. There's called IUPUI. So it's Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, right in the middle of Indianapolis. I was an electrical engineering major. I hated it. I was doing really high level calculus. I was around people that were incredibly introverted, and it just wasn't my jam. I transferred down to the flagship campus of Indiana, Bloomington, go Hoosiers. And there I studied economics. I actually wanted to be an investment banker at one point in time. And then I realized I didn't want to be an investment banker after talking to people that had went down that path. You basically scuttle your 20s, but you're really rich. So didn't want to do that. Got really heavily into tech. I started building websites, AWS, iPhone apps, just super, super nerdy stuff. But then I had the epiphany. I really actually wanted to start earning money and making money. And from that, I realized that making somebody a cash register is not as efficacious as actually making them money. So when I started that, I started marketing. I realized, when I can make people money versus actually build them a cash register, they're going to pay me a lot more. So that was kind of my first epiphany into switching from being a builder to more of a marketer. Got really into it, cut my teeth. A really good friend of mine, she was a yoga influencer on Instagram at the time. So I was into photography as well. So we did ebooks, shot a bunch of ebooks for her, and then a bunch of ads, made not real money, but at the time, like I was like, wow, this is money. This is awesome, especially compared to when I was getting paid $500, $1,000 to build somebody's WordPress site. So that was awesome. And then from that, went into luxury real estate, did some paid media there. From luxury real estate, moved up to Whole Foods. So I did all the paid media for the recruitment vertical over at Whole Foods. From that, I went to agency life. So I went over to an agency in, New York called Flatiron. Spent tons of money, VC-backed companies, got to work with Oprah, a bunch of big names, spent a bananas amount of money. And this really cut my teeth. I came from e-com, and this was actually all app installs. So it was really cool to have that exposure because it's same, but different. There was just a lot of really unique things. The funnel's just totally different. Like you just start to learn getting almost like an app install is kind of the equivalent of an add to cart. And then I had to get really sophisticated in reporting because there are 7-day trials. So you get into cohorting, and it just gets pretty crazy. But it was really cool and it was awesome. One of the things that was unique though in the app install world, especially when you're in kind of VC backed companies, it's a bit of growth at all costs. And so you just see we would call it jokingly, and no disrespect to the West Coast, but we'd call it LA math or LA math, where like you're acquiring people for like $500-$600 and like the LTV was like $100 or $200. So it was just like at a certain point, like selling $20 bills for $10 just doesn't work. But and so from that, I went and started my own agency, and then ran my own agency for a few years. And then from that, hooked up with AJ and Max, and now I'm the CMO over at Triple.
Nice. So you hit on something there that I think is so interesting in the world of entrepreneurship. And we primarily focus on e-commerce on the show. But I mean, there's not that many, like if you're an entrepreneur, right? If you're like, there's not that many degrees of difference between like, if you're going to like run an e-com brand or start an e-com brand and, launch an app or something like that. The main thing but there are degrees of difference between like that and like doing an agency, for example, right? Because one's going to take an upfront cash flow, an upfront cash investment, or it's going to take, if you're going to bootstrap, I mean, it's going to take an upfront cash investment still. You can't do $0, but if you're going to bootstrap, it takes being profitable immediately, right? Yes. Whereas an agency, it oftentimes is bootstrapped, right? Like it doesn't really take an upfront cash flow. And a lot of, I actually say that like a service business is like not a bad place to start as an entrepreneur, as like a 100%. If that's what that's what you feel like you are, you're like, I want to own my business. And it's actually a great place to start too, if you're like not sure if you're an entrepreneur, because it's like a service-based business. The product is human resource, right? Like people and their expertise and time. And it's a great way to learn if you actually like being an entrepreneur, if you just like doing a thing, you know what I mean? So, but like what you said, I'm kind of getting off track. What you said was like, you worked with some VC backed, brand companies that would do that LA math. And I would like, that's not uncommon. I've done that same thing where, you don't really understand it. Right. And maybe you understand it a little bit more than I do, but like, I would never really understand how it'd be like, why are they still spending so much money when their acquisition cost is $500 and their average order value on this, like, you know, keto drink, keto supplement is like $30, and they don't even have any data on their LTV. I mean, I kind of understand that. Like, look, we just have to acquire to get some data on the LTV, but like they've been in it for a year now. And so they should have the data, right? And they don't have any data that shows them that people come back and buy again. Like, why are they doing this? And then they'll still be raising rounds of funding. And I'm like, I don't get this world, right? Like, I don't get how this company can exist and why investors are backing it. And maybe you know better than I do, but somebody explained it to me once this way. He's like, look, angels, like, or VC people, like, they're like, think of them like if they were at a casino in Vegas,
Yes,
they would be just putting bets everywhere. Right? Like, let me put a small bet everywhere and win one jackpot, and then I'll win. You know what I mean? Like, and so it creates a very interesting business culture if you're actually a marketer, if you actually want profit. And I'm not saying it's bad or good or not, you know, like, I think some people are like bootstrapped all the way, and some people are like, yeah, we raised this founding. And, but I do think you have to decide, you know. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? I kind of like didn't really ask a question there. Maybe I'm not.
No. I think it's actually really eloquently put. So ultimately, what would happen? So, and I love the idea how you shy away from good and bad, because ultimately those are like emotional judgments. And like, unless you know the context of the business, like, that's what everything is going to be based on. It's going to be based on the goal of the business. And a lot of times the business has some sort of exit strategy plan. So a lot of these apps that we were working with, we're either one, just trying to gain market share. And so the play there is like, we just want to make a land grab. And then once we're this big gorilla in the room, then nobody can touch us. And then we can kind of ratchet down our costs and expenses and then ride this wave of profitability. So that's one bet. The other bet is they're trying to exit, right? And so there's this kind of growth at all costs, and the investors want to see this up into the right curve. And so they really don't care about that. The quote unquote profitability can come later, especially if the profitability is being ate up by costs that you can ratchet back, right? Like, it's not these huge fixed costs. These are variable costs. That's like, okay, cool. Let's just cut acquisition cost in half, and now we're instantly profitable. So
or just stop spending money. Yep.
Precisely. Yep. And so there is some wisdom to that, but I think ultimately a lot of it rolled into what you talked about earlier. And Peter Thiel is kind of famous for this, where it's not necessarily small bets. I think I would actually use a different descriptor and call them outlier bets, where if this does go, it's going to go. And so you have this portfolio strategy where just betting on all these people, almost in a way like a draft, right? And so like, you're drafting all these people, and if one or two of these people hit, the whole portfolio is fine, because it's getting paid off by one or two of these outliers, and the rest of the people don't care. It's similar to a Hollywood model where you might throw $5 million at 10 movies or something, and one of those movies hits and it pays off in spades, the whole portfolio times 10x. I think Sequoia, or I can't remember the
5 million isn't that much, you know. Like,
yeah. I'm just throwing random numbers out there, but Bill Gurley, I forget what his fund is, but Bill Gurley anyways, there's a big fund. I'm pretty sure it's Sequoia, but anyway, their fund had been around forever. They invested in a ton of stuff, and Uber basically made all of their money, or the Uber returns, because they were very early into Uber, were bigger than all of the returns combined from the previous investments of all of that in a VC firm. And so that's kind of the strategy there, is like, if you can just find one Uber, one Facebook, what have you. And so that's where I think it was stemming from. But to your point, because I came from ecom, like, that's not really a viable path for ecom. It's more so in some semblance of software or service business, where there's either less marginal cost, or the economics are a little more gracious as you scale. So, I mean, that's like, so I'm at Triple Whale. SaaS companies are notorious for this, where like SaaS companies are one of the best things to invest in, because basically once you can find product market fit, all you need to do is hire a bunch of developers, and because there's no marginal cost really. Like if I need to ship, if somebody else signs up for Triple Whale today, like it really doesn't cost us anything. Obviously there's server costs and there's some things here and there, but it's not the same as like if I'm selling protein powder or something like that. I have to have the COGS for the protein powder. I have to have the shipping and handling for the protein powder. There's all these marginal costs that go with every unit sold. Whereas another way to think about it is like atoms and bits. Like if you're in atoms, you have marginal costs. There's just no way around it. But when you're in bits, like you can just print another CD, or like, for example, like John, if you had a webinar on how to media buy or something like that, every subsequent customer that buys that webinar doesn't cost you anything, or it costs you like basically nothing. You could, for all intents and purposes, when you do the analysis, the marginal cost is going to be close enough to zero that it's pretty much negligible. Whereas if you're hosting a conference or something like that, there's going to be fixed costs. There's going to be marginal costs for every person that comes there, yada, yada, yada. So I'm kind of in the weeds now, but ultimately I understood the models. It was just really interesting to see, because I think there's also a certain point of it's really hard to break the sunk cost fallacy where you can put good money behind bad. And that's not where you want to be, where it's like, this thing it's an absolute bum. Like it's terrible. You need to kill it, take it out behind the shed and like go on to your next thing. But then, you see another 5-10 million just pour in and you're like, why? Like, what's the point? Oh, because we've already invested 20 million. You're like, another way to think about it. Exactly. And so if you hadn't invested that $20 million, would you still put in that extra 5 to 10? No. So then why would you do that then? But again, it's hard to call your baby ugly. It's hard to say you made a mistake. It's, these things, ego's a mother effer. It's a tough one to get over. And like, so I think you see, especially when you're kind of that alpha world of like VC and stuff, very powerful people, a lot of resources to throw around. But so, yeah, no judgment there, but it was definitely very odd to, again, see these incredibly high CACs and then have the visibility into the business to be like, dude, even on your wildest dreams, you're never going to break even. And so it's like, that was kind of, I think, the most eye-opening experience.
When you brought up Uber, and this is weird. We're like kind of getting off e-commerce a little bit, but like you brought up Uber. Uber kind of famously released a quarterly earnings report, I think a couple of years ago now, where they stated, we don't think we'll ever be profitable. We don't think we'll ever be profitable. We do with Uber, biggest, probably, I would say the biggest marketplace business in the world.
I would definitely say it's at least top 5-ish. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's big.
Well, it says it will never be profitable. Yeah. Right. Like, so that, I mean, what you have to understand if you go into this world, and maybe you've seen this, I'm not like, to me, I'm like, doesn't that just mean somebody's going to get caught holding the bag?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought, yes, that's what I thought, but like, maybe not.
It's so, sorry to cut you off, but to your point, another kind of really good example is WeWork. And so Uber got out, everybody in Uber got paid, dude. Everybody got like 3 comma club paid. They're out. Once you go public, you can push it on to retail, you can push it on to public investors, you can push it on to people buying pensions, you can do all this stuff on public markets that you can't when you're a private company, for a whole myriad of reasons. And so WeWork was in that exact same position where WeWork was just this I mean, think of this, dude. Adam Neumann literally burnt $8 billion and walked away with $1 billion. Can you imagine somebody that smart? Like, you wasted almost $8 billion and somehow you get compensated $1 billion for wasting $8 billion. Like, that still just like absolutely blows my mind. But if they would have got out, and honestly, they might have gotten out if it wasn't for COVID. And so it's just like this crazy, like, so ultimately the too long didn't read there is, if you can't make it in the exit to the IPO, all that funny math catches up with you.
Oh yeah. Yep. People get caught holding the bag all the time.
Exactly.
That's the thing 100%. You have to understand if you're going in, and maybe to kind of bring this back to e-com, or to who we talk to, which is probably marketers, e-com operators, e-com marketers, that kind of thing. You got to understand what you are. So if you're a company that raises and you're in a position where it's like, we're never going to be profitable. And I've worked with some like kind of Silicon Valley, like e-commerce companies, if you will. So they're from that like Silicon Valley VC venture-backed world, but they're launching physical product brands. And yeah, if they're never going to turn the corner to profitability, if you're like, look, in your wildest dreams, this $500 CAC will never work out for you, right? Or this $100 CAC or whatever it is, in your wildest dreams, this will never work out for you. That's what you have to understand, is that this whole venture-backed world runs on like, how do I be the one who holds the bag at the right time and passes the bag at the right time? 100%. And how do I have the right amount of ego and not and kind of like read other people's over like too much ego, right? Like that's kind of how this whole world runs. So if you work there, if you're a marketer there, if that's what you're doing with your brand, that's just like kind of how you have to understand it. And it's a little different now because it's not so centralized to one geographical area anymore. Yes. I would say that's how the Silicon Valley market like really runs, really runs. Yep. And right, like you're talking about Uber, you're talking about WeWork. That's how the Silicon Valley market really runs. But now there's all these PE firms, all over, and some of them are smarter. Some of them know, they're trying to acquire like, positive EBITDA businesses and stuff like that. So yeah, like and I shouldn't say smarter because that implies that like one isn't smart. They're making different kinds of bets. They're making probably higher dollar, right? Like they're investing a lot of money. It's like a real estate investment, right? Like you buy a piece of real estate to use as a rental, and it's just, it's going to cash flow. It is going to cash flow. It's real estate. It's going to cash flow, but it's going to take a long time to return your investment.
So there's one capital intensive as well.
Right.
So that's the thing. You have to have money.
Right. You got to have money. So there's ones making bets like that. And then there's ones making bets on, like outlier companies that, there's no proof here, but it's like, but if it goes, it'll really go, like you said. So you just got to know where you are as a marketer, as a founder, as an entrepreneur. If you get into that raising world at all or VC world at all, I've stayed out. I've stayed in the bootstrapped space, and other than working as a contractor, on paid media for some of these companies. And even then, I would say that I probably didn't understand it well enough to like really get into it. And I didn't like it. You know what I mean? I'm like, I don't like running 500. Like, I don't feel like I get to say I do anything is that cool, Yeah.
And just to put a bow on that, when I think of like raising money or capital, I would take a look at your business and put it through two lenses. Am I capital constrained or am I market constrained? Because if you're capital constrained, maybe you should raise money. Like if you just need to hire more people, or if you just need to buy more ads, or if you just need more money to actually grow the business, that's a capital constraint.
You actually
go raise money,
fire, right? Like
yes, you have product market fit. Your fuel fire thing. I use that all the time. By the way, you guys got to watch the episode. It's fantastic. But yes, that's exactly it. So you're capital constrained, right? Now, if you're market constrained and your product sucks, or you haven't found product market fit or whatever, no amount of capital is going to help that. Yeah, and money. So you can buy more ads. It's not a capital constraint; it's a market constraint. So
money isn't going to fix your CAC problems.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's kind of how I think of raising money, is in that dichotomy of, am I capital constrained with my growth or am I market constrained? Because if I'm market constrained, all you're going to do is get more people's money, and you're going to get people mad at you. And then quite frankly, you might get activist investors. You might at the end of the day, you're going to lose some control of your company because you are giving up equity for that money. Like that money just doesn't come for free. And so you're going to give up a portion of your company. And then at a certain point, you might dilute your shares because you might give out more shares because you need to raise again. And so there can be this really negative flywheel effect. So again, if you don't need the money, don't take it. And I think kind of what you're really hitting on very prescient, John, is that start with the end in mind. Like if your end is to exit and go crazy, go get capital. Because guess what? That's the best part of entrepreneurship. Like if you F up and fail, dude, it's not your money. Like your reputation takes a hit. That sucks. But there's a lot of like, Adam Newman is coming back on the scene. And like we were just talking, this guy burnt $7 billion. And you know what I mean?
$7 billion with a B.
Yeah. And people are still trying to give this guy money. And so I think there's a certain aspect of start with the end in mind, and then that'll really alleviate a lot of these kind of knock-on effects. But yeah, you can get into some really, economically precarious situations if you don't, and then you start to, take money, and then that money doesn't do anything because like when you take money, there's literally a pre and post. So I'm going to give John $1 million. I say John's company is worth $5 million. When I give him this $20 million, it's going to be worth $60 million instantly. Once I give him that $20 million, that's kind of how pretty much raises work. And so if you don't hit those goals, it gets into just, again, really stressful, not, fun situations.
If you are taking money, as some signals that I noticed, if you are taking money because you're out of money to pay yourself and your team's salaries, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, why are you out of money to pay yourself and your team's salaries before you're taking more money? And yeah, that I saw all the time. It's like, basically they just go do more raises so that they can keep a job, right? That's their job, is to raise so that they can continue to have a job. And that's, yeah, it's just, maybe it's for some people. For me, it's like having to work two sides of the business of trying to actually grow this business and also trying to like raise for it all the time. I don't love it. It's not for me. And it really creates strange situations as a marketer sometimes, where it's like you said, like, we know we can just turn off ads and we'll be profitable all of a sudden. And then you're sitting there like, like, what do I do then?
Yeah.
So, okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit. This took a little bit of detour from the normal, but I like that, like we cover some different stuff on marketing.
Well, I got to get a word in here, John.
Go ahead, Casey.
I got to jump in here real quick, because first of all, I got to say, this is super interesting, Rabah, hearing more about your background, because this is kind of similar to John. It's in no way similar to mine. So hearing how different people kind of arrive to like more of a similar like endpoint, or kind of where we all kind of operate a little bit more now, it's very fascinating, because it kind of shapes our perspective and our view about said thing, right? And I noticed, because this is something we do, 10 times per episode at least, John and I both think in analogies and metaphors. And I noticed you already alluded to one of John's about the gas and the fire. He says that all the time. I've taken that. That's a Johnism for sure. I don't know if
Johnism.
I don't know if it's an OG, like an OJ, I guess, an original Johnism, but it's a great one. So I have a question for you. I know that you're a sports fan, and we've had an episode where we've gone over specifically sports metaphors. If you need me to stall for time for you to think of one, I think you can see where my question is going. Do you have a sports metaphor that you like specifically for e-commerce or even business, kind of the business world in general?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would say the sports metaphor would be for e-commerce, that everybody has to be, people don't have specific jobs. Everybody's function should be to win. And so when you have a point guard, they might say, for basketball, like, I'm running the one, so I need to run the offense or whatever. Or if you're in a soccer, you might say the goalie's job is to stop the ball from going in the net. At the end of the day, those are more so tactics, but everybody has to be aligned on the mission of winning. Like, nobody wants to, especially at high performing, you don't want to lose. And so everybody has to be aligned with that mission of winning the championship, winning the title, winning the district, winning that. And so I think that would be my analogy of sports, would be, when you look at all these great teams, especially like the OG UCLAs, or even the OG Cowboys, or the Niners, oh boy, Walsh, right? Like a mazillion titles. Like, every time you talk to those people, every single one of those players knew exactly what the mission was, knew exactly what the goal was. And there wasn't so as a CMO, I have directs now, or direct reports. And it's not about working for me. It's about working toward the mission of hitting our goals. It's not about me being the boss. It's about me working in tandem with them, and everybody's trying to win the game. And I think that would be the analogy that I would use, where you really need to make sure that everybody's aligned with the mission and the goal. And obviously, so I'm an economist, so like divisions of labor is always top of mind. But at the end of the day, everybody needs to be aligned with winning and what that goal is. And I think that's ubiquitous across great companies as well as great sports teams.
Yeah. I'm a basketball guy, and I remember like a travel team I was playing on when I was younger. I played a couple years of like AAU ball, and I had a coach, and like, look, the way that you win games in basketball is you understand whose role is what, right? And that's important. So then that's not what you're saying. I'm not hearing what you're not saying, in that like, it's not about roles. Like, we say this all the time, like, you know, like role player, like he's a role player. He's like a main primary score. He's a franchise player, right? Like roles actually are super important in understanding the roles. But I remember this game that we were having where we kept getting killed in transition. Like they were kind of, they were like a very good transition team, and they kind of kept taking us apart in transition. And we called a timeout and like our coach was kind of getting on us about our transition defense. And one of the players goes, "I got number 5," right? Like that's what he said. And the coach was like, "Sit down," right? Like it's not about what your job is. You know what I mean? Like it's not about your assignment. And he might've meant it in a way like, okay, everybody just say who you have. I have number 5, right? He just didn't say it right? But like he's what he was kind of focused on is he's like, I'm doing my job. Yes. Like we're getting killed in transition. I got number 5. Who's got number 30? He's freaking scored 10 times in a row on us, right? And the coach was like, it doesn't matter who your defensive assignment is. Stop them from scoring in transition is your job, right? Like, yep. When the roles break down, you have to be willing to be flexible and break down. Yep. With now, you know, when we're running the way that we're supposed to be running, we play our roles, absolutely, right? But you have to be willing to like flex, go away from your role, you know, switch. You got to be able to switch.
You know, Rabah, I loved your shout out to the 49ers, Bill Walsh. Honestly, when you guys were talking about that VC world, that LA math, my natural brain went to like, you know, I'm so used to working with like bootstrapped e-com brands that I'm thinking like the West Coast offense, like good round game. You need a solid foundation on the good run game, little short passes, maybe a play action deep every once in a while, but you kind of play it safe. You kind of eat what you kill, those kinds of things. And then when I hear you guys talking about that world, all I can think of is like the new school, like Andy Reid, like Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, let it fly, vertical offense, like okay, average passing play last year was 30 yards or whatever, something crazy already. This year we can do 32. Like what? That's insane.
No, I love that. And honestly, to build off of that analogy even more, I would say that that's also a function of the environment. And so like, I'm not into sporty ball as much as I used to be, but like back in the NFL days when I used to watch it, dude, you didn't go over the middle. You know why? Because you'd get cracked. And the receiver would get hit once, like, dude, I'm not running that route again. That linebacker just lit me up. And now if you touch people in the wrong way or blah, blah, blah. And again, there's no judgment on the game. It's just I grew up different. Kind of, I know you're in the NBA, John. It's very similar, right? Like the OG John Stockton, remember the Knicks, Charles Oakley? Like you come in the paint, son, you're getting hit. Like it wasn't what it is now where you look at LeBron and all of it, it's a technical or something. It's a flagrant foul if you touch his pinky kind of stuff where it's like, and so again, no judgment on that because it's the NBA is a business, the NFL is a business. Well, NFL is nonprofit, but we won't get into that. Anyways, but the too long didn't read is I think what happened there is that you start to transition to make your abilities be more productive in the environment that you're in. And I think those environments change, and that's exactly how business works, where, you know, whether it's the funding environment where you can't raise money, so you need to be more fiscally responsible, or I mean, in the 2000s, man, it was cocaine and champagne. Like you just shook a cup and people would throw $50 million in. Like, oh, you need money? Yeah, well, you'll raise. And then there's cycles to this thing, right? And so now we're in a cycle where it's like, okay, a lot of the stuff that shouldn't have raised money is dying. And that's exactly what should happen. That's the beauty of capitalism is like there's winners, there's losers. And so I think that is kind of also where Andy Reid and those kind of high flying offenses. I mean, Kurt Warner, best show on turf, that kind of stuff where it's like you use what you have first off, but it's also you need to understand the environment you're in to extend that sports analogy. And so you need to understand where you can really, because there's a lot of times like, again, those over the middle passes are pretty much impossible to cover. And now there's really zero downside to him because nobody's getting hit. And then guess what? If you do get hit, as long as your guy doesn't get hurt, you get 15 yards and a first down. And so the incentives just, I'm a big believer in incentives, and I think incentives drive a lot of behavior.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Fans love to see a 50-yard pass.
Yeah, another great point you had there. It's another sports metaphor. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. There is no like remaining the same. Totally because if you're not getting better, the rest of the league is, just like in anything business, really. So great points, John. Sorry to hijack it there. I had to insert that little bit because I knew I wanted to get that in. But I'll let you get back to some of your more regularly scheduled questions here.
Let's shift gears here a little bit. Like I kind of have like two things I want to hit here. Is I hit on transitioning from, and maybe you can give me some years here so I can like get a, like when you were doing your own agency, you're primarily working with e-com brands. Yeah.
Yeah. About 1 million to 10 million was my sweet spot.
1 to 10 million.
Yeah.
And you transitioned from there into Triple Whale, correct?
Yes.
So this is very interesting because, and I guess you had a little bit of a SaaS background, but like a VC, investment backed SaaS background, which is different, right? And I don't know if Triple Whale does races, but like an investment backed SaaS background where it's like all about, hey, who are we going to leave holding the bag with this thing? As opposed to what Triple Whale is, which is, something that's actually like a potentially a very solvent company, right? Like,
exactly.
So I want to talk to you about your shift from ecom into SaaS because we're ecom people here. This is a show about ecom. And I mean, not just as a media buyer, like as generally a marketer, why did you take that shift? Why did you do that shift? Why did you like, how are you feel? What are the benefits and drawbacks, of going SaaS,
definitely
getting sassy.
Getting sassy. So just higher level, one of the biggest shifts, not even just the business model, but was the construction of my time. So going from IC, which is kind of dirty corporate language for individual contributor, to an executive, it's just a massive shift in terms of value vectors, right? Like what drives value for a really top level executive is not going to be what drives value for a top level IC. And so that was a big shift for me. And in specific, I used to kind of crap on quote unquote executives because I came up again in that kind of coding technical world. And I had this dogma of you're not technically proficient, like you're a scrub. Like that's how I gave you value. That's how I ranked you in my hierarchy. Like, can you code? Are you proficient in what you're doing? Yada, yada, yada. Like, are you technical? I'm starting to realize how wrong I was, where there is so much to be said about people that can skill up a team, hire up a team, get a team rowing all in the same direction, all at the same time, understanding how to, maneuver certain politics. Like, and so now I'm understanding why the executive compensations are kind of where they are, because it's incredibly hard to find great executives and it's incredibly hard to be one, quite frankly. And so that's kind of the higher level. The SaaS kind of business model stuff. The ecom to SaaS is a little different because ecom is more so not necessarily like one night stands, but there is a certain aspect of the pitch can be much more truncated. And a lot of times there's not a lot of education needed or requisite knowledge to absorb the value. So like athletic greens. Yeah, athletic greens,
it's
right?
A physical thing that you
I want to be healthy, put it in this drink, be healthy, look at these models or whatever. Like there's just way easier hooks where, for example, like Triple Whale, like we have cohorting. If you don't know how to use cohorting, that screen's pretty much useless to you. And to be fair, like cohorting is, it's a higher level subject that it's very confusing and it's hard to get your head around. And like, once you do it, you get it. But until you get it, you don't. And if you don't, then you're not going to get value from the product. If you're not getting value from the product, you're not going to pay for the product. And so that to me is one of the reasons why when I came on, our biggest initiatives were community content and education, where we just started paid media like 2 weeks ago. And it's still like paltry levels. We're spending like $500-600 a day. I mean, pretty much negligible. And so that to me was the biggest the biggest bifurcation between the two of ecom/DTC to SaaS is that there's a huge education component and there's also a different economics. So there's kind of a 3-to-1 LTV to CAC is kind of what you hear thrown out there. And so you don't know what your churn is yet until you have, a decent 6 months to a year of lifetime to understand how people are actually going to churn through their product. But once you do get that, you can get into some, again, LA math, but in a good way where you're essentially buying forward, right? So for example, like if you know the LTV on somebody that buys a $500 product and they're going to stay with you for a year, that's $6,000, right? And so if you're going to keep that kind of 3-to-1 ratio, you can spend up to $2,000 to acquire that person and you're still going to net out just fine. And so there's some just nuances there, but for me, the pitches can be more succinct and more direct in ecom and DTC, whereas SaaS is really an education play. And it's also a relationship that you're building. Not to say like e-commerce isn't a relationship, but again, you're getting into contractual, purchases where you're entering into a contract with somebody, a month-to-month contract, versus DTC. Really, you care about 60, 90-day LTV because you have no clue when these people are going to come back. You have no clue how do you measure churn in DTC, right? It's like, you don't. I mean, it's very difficult because what if somebody doesn't buy in 6 months, if somebody doesn't buy in 12 months, if somebody doesn't buy in 24 months, like what is the lifetime of that person? It gets very, very challenging, very, very fuzzy. Whereas when you have a subscription or a contractual business, it's very easy to calculate your churn where it's like, hey, we had 100 people today. We have 90 people yesterday. You know what I mean? Like it gets really easy to understand that, where DTC is really, again, built off, in my opinion, that 60, 90-day LTV, or even maybe a 6-month LTV if you're using cohorting, just because you don't know what that lifetime is. And so it's really hard to calculate churn. If it's really hard to calculate churn, then what is the lifetime kind of thing? So that was, for me, the biggest distinguishing factors between the two is, one, how you build the relationships, and two, what drives value for the customers, especially in terms of acquisition.
Yeah. And so something else come up for me while you were talking too, because another shift you made is you went from e-commerce direct to consumer, which I have my own opinion on this, but I'm going to use some classic marketing terms here, which was a B2C, yep. Right? Like it was a business to consumer like approach.
Points.
Now you've also pushed over to SaaS, which you've gone to both going to SaaS from e-commerce to SaaS, and from business to consumer to business to business. Now, I actually have my opinion that might be a little contrarian here on this, but like, have you noticed major differences as a marketer moving from B2C to B2B?
100%. And these actually were pre-hold. Like I actually had these kind of assumptions, and they're ultimately just verified. But so I guess kind of to use Triple Whale as a lens, we ultimately have two cohorts. We have a store owner operator cohort, and then we have an agency cohort. And the agency cohort is more akin to that B2B transaction, and the store owner operator is more akin to that B2C transaction. And so when you get into those there's just, again, different value vectors. So B2C kind of people, they really care about product quality. They care about just all these, like, the product has to be awesome. They want to be seen as the cool kids. Like, there's all these kind of unique attributes. Whereas B2B support is huge. Like, if I'm going to give you all this money and this thing breaks, I need a phone number to call, or I need somebody to email. Like, that is absolutely, especially if it's a client facing thing where I'm not on the hook for the support. And so again, there's just different value vectors. And so there's a nice framework called jobs to be done that I subscribe to, that you really want to identify the jobs to be done that the people are hiring your product for. And they're just hiring your product for different reasons. Like the store owner operator just wants to get profitable. Whereas the agency wants to increase billings. It wants to increase retention. It wants to make sure that the money they're paying you is a return on investment. It wants to make sure they have zero exposure to support. They want to, they don't want to support it. They want to make sure that the SLA is in line with service level agreement. Like, if something breaks, how often is it going to break? And is that within my threshold of okay? And so there's just these different things. And so even though it's the same service, you pitch it to them in the different ways, because they're going to have different anxieties. They're going to have different expectations. They're going to have different, again, value vectors that they're going to drive along that B2B and B2C don't necessarily do. But we have ultimately both cohorts that value different things, but they're ultimately ending at a subscription, if that makes any sense.
Right. Yeah. And in like very technical terms, both cohorts would be B2B, right? Like they're both.
Yes, correct. 100%. Yeah. 100%. Yes.
Let me tell you my contrarian thought on this is that I shouldn't say I don't think B2B and B2C are different. But what I should say is I think, to steal a term from you, I think it's a bad mental model.
Ooh, interesting. Say more.
Because I think that the way, like, we're like, oh, B2B and B2C are different. So when I'm talking to consumers, I need to like talk to a person. And when I'm talking to businesses, I need to like say what's important to the business. It's H to H either way, right? Like it's human to human either way, right? So you have to know who you're talking to either way. You got to break it down to decision makers. If you're B2B, you got to break it down to like who within the business is actually making this decision, whose attention do I need to get, who do I need to be talking to, and stuff like that. So either way, it's value props and understanding what's important to them, and like getting their attention either way. So that's why I think it's a bad mental model, because I think so many B2B companies think we're B2B, and then they just go like like they'll use like inside language in their marketing. And I'm like, stop that. Like, don't do that. You know, like you're still talking to people. You still need to get people's attention either way. Or they'll be like, you know, Facebook isn't really right for B2B because it's not a business platform. Like, but all the humans are on it, right? Or all the Instagram or whatever, TikTok, like, but the humans are still there. The humans that make the decision to buy your product are still there. So that's why I think it's like not the best mental model. I will acknowledge that it is different though. And the main difference that you didn't say that I will say is that in the B2B world, it actually is a little bit easier to create working capital from customers, because you do not need in many cases, you do not need to sell as many things or as many times. So like if you're going business to consumer and you're selling like, you know, a product to the masses, it's pretty hard to scale any other way than like purely advertising and getting them to a place to buy the product. It's hard to grow any other way than that, because you can actually grow a B2B business pretty large on kind of like business development, conferences, like handshake interactions, handshake marketing, you might say. You know, you might not even need to go to paid media to grow a B2B company, like pretty large in a lot of, so it's like you can get a lot further. You just have to think about your marketing a little bit differently. Like, hey, things like going to conferences, speaking, being on, like those are marketing activities in the B2B world. Whereas in the B2C world, it's like, in order for this thing to even really get any legs, you need a massive amount of traffic, right? And so I think that's the main difference. But I don't love the mental model that people use and say like, oh, you got to speak to them differently because they're a business. Like, I mean, you speak to them differently because it's a different product, you know, the different pain point in their life that it's solving. But like humans spend a whole lot of their time at work. So let's just kind of treat them like humans. I don't know, thoughts?
So I do love that. I would push back a little bit and say it's an absolutely different transaction because it's a longer sales cycle, like 100% longer sales cycle. You're going to go through this maze of like gatekeepers and then finally getting to somebody that actually cuts the check. And then those are different pitches. Like the person that wants the person that you're going to pitch. So for example, like us, a lot of times we'll pitch the head of media buying, right? Or something like that. And then we'll actually have to talk. So they're like, okay, cool. This platform looks amazing. It's going to help our clients. Now now you got to talk to the VP. Okay. The VP is like, hey, this looks great. What are the terms? Those terms are okay, but actually send me better terms. Okay, cool. Now the VP goes, okay, cool. CEO or CFO, hey, we're going to enter into this contract. You're talking, you know, month to 3 months. Now you're killing a bigger animal, you know, sorry for the morbid references, but
yeah,
the kill is bigger. And so it's definitely worth, like the juice is worth the squeeze. But it's just a totally different sales cycle, which means that you're going to have different people, which means that there's just a different headspace that you're in when you're selling to those people. The other thing that makes a bigger difference is B2B, it's not their money. Like when you're selling to a store owner operator, like almost always it's their money. And so again, they're going to have these different value vectors and different jobs to be done. So I agree that you don't need to talk to them differently, but so we try and keep the same brand voice and all of that. But at the same time, they're going to value different things, and we're going to accentuate those things that they value and try and alleviate their anxieties, because they're not going to have the same anxieties as somebody that's running, 20 clients or 50 clients or something like that, where it's like, okay, well, if we're going to bring you in, we're going to build SOPs around you. And then like, how much is this thing going to marry me? Like, are we going to marry this thing? What's going on? There's just a longer term vision a lot of times with B2B transactions, and that hence usually the sales cycle is a lot longer. So I take your points. I think you're on the right track, but I do think that B2C and B2B, or maybe we're getting caught up in the nomenclature, but I do think you need to understand what the people you're pitching, what their jobs to be done are, what their anxieties are, and then try and alleviate those, because a lot of times it's not going to be the same. And quite frankly, you might even have different anxieties within that cohort, where some people might be like, hey, economically, I'm just not here, or hey, I am here, but I need to understand if you're going to have this on the roadmap or that on the roadmap, and then I can adopt you. So I do take your point, but I think that there is something to be said of making different. There's this phrase called horses for courses. And basically all that means is you should use the right horse for the right course. And so if you have a really fast horse, that's going to do really great on straightaways, right? But if you have a really fast horse that can't turn, if there's any turns in that course, you don't want that horse. And so you're going to go get a more agile horse where its top speed might be lower, but it's actually going to finish the course faster because it's more tuned to what the needs of that course are. So I definitely take your point, but I think that there are a little more nuances to B2B transactions. But I will tell you where you're right is the marketing spends a lot different. To your point of like sponsorships, and there's reputation, and then, you know, aligning with the right people, understanding who the power brokers are in that space, and understanding that kind of thing, where store and arbors don't care about that. Like, can you make me profitable? How much does it cost? Okay, let's go. Like, and so it's just a different consideration set, if you will.
And I would say it's different customer avatars, right? Like the same thing in B2C. People buy your product for different use cases for different reasons. Is that what you're about to say, Casey?
No, I was going to say, I love these different like lenses. We look at these totally different situations through, and we try to like grab common threads and stuff through them. Actually, I think that this episode will directly follow an episode we're doing that's loosely titled something like the value of a marketer. And it's really interesting with all these different perspectives, different situations. Like the value of any one individual is different given the situation they're put in, right? And I loved your realization you said about essentially team building, where, you know, you kind of looked at it kind of like in an arithmetic way, like X person has this value, stack that on top of this other person, that's how much value we have. And then your realization that like, it sounds like something that I've said that's like, some people are kind of like more like multipliers as opposed to like that, you know, those glue people, you know, you kind of build that little bit of culture, you get people stroking at the same time, rowing, you know, and that's hard to, I mean, I like to think of myself as that kind of multiplication factor, except, you know, it's the, what degree are you 1.05? Like, you know, I like to think that even at the littlest level, that's the way I try to operate. But yeah, that's just, it's so fascinating. One quick one I got to interject, John.
Yeah.
Rabah, what personality type are you? Are you familiar with MBTI?
Yeah, I forget what I am, but I'm like the extroverted leader that is like a ENTJ, I believe, if I remember correctly.
One letter away from me.
From you? Yeah, very similar. Yeah.
Yeah, totally reads. I mean, I'm not some personality junkie, but it's just a fascinating, like, quick little insight into somebody's back, because you do kind of rate. I think you probably are that kind of multiplication person as well. You sound like a leader when you talk, man.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, I'll tell you what, though, it's definitely different. So like in the developer world, they're kind of called 10X developers or 100X developers, where it's like you get this person and they can run. But man, I'll tell you, it has been a huge challenge to convert that to an executive mindset, where there's just like, it is just night and day what makes like a 10Xer to an actual, like an executive that becomes ultimately like this multiplier of people versus this multiplier of work, if that makes any sense at all. Yeah, and so that, like, an executive is really like, they're not going back to that analogy of proficiency. I was listening to, I can't remember the podcast, but I know you guys are familiar with soccer, but there's this kind of legend called Pele from Brazil. He's this icon. I mean, he's one of the, considered one of the best soccer players ever. He wasn't even the captain of the Brazilian team. And what was crazy about that to me was, again, I came from that proficiency world, and like the best player on the team is the captain. And the reasoning for the coach was, he's the best player on the team, but he's not the best captain. And I don't want to burden this person with all of that stuff of having to deal with the team drama, with having to keep people in the locker room right, like blah, blah, blah. Like, just let him go play, and then find that captain that'll actually be kind of what I think you referred to, John, as like that glue person, or somebody where you really can make that cohesive team work together, but they might not be the best player. And so that kind of going, you're getting all the sports analogies out of me. Jeez, people are going to think I'm just like a huge sporty head. So that would, to me, again, was that epiphany where it's like, oh, wow, I don't have to be the best person, but if I can make sure my team is enabled to get to where we are and they know what the goal is, everybody's aligned with the mission, just get out of the way. And again, it sounds much easier than it is, but that was a realization for me, where you have to give up the reins. You have to hire smarter people than you and just let them run. And ultimately now what I'm doing with my direct reports is ultimately like a calibration period, where ideally we get to a mind meld where we're thinking the exact same thing, but I'm asking them, okay, before I give them an answer, when they ask me a question, it's like, well, what do you think I would say? And then as that aligns more and more and more with what my answer would be, then it's, what do you need to ask me? Go. That's exactly what I would do. And even better, a lot of times they'll hit me with the better answer than I would have had. I'm like, that's actually pretty good. Let's do that. So there's just a lot of nuance to leadership that I really took for granted when I was, in agency life or working kind of as a really productive IC.
Yeah, man. That's what we do. We do sports analogies here. We pull them out of people. To your like leader, best player thing. I always think of like some like grizzled veteran, like catcher who's like got bad knees and he's 38 years old, just like way past his prime, but he's the leader of the team. You got that like hot shot, like 22-year-old center fielder. He's making diving plays. He's hitting dingers, like, as often as anything when he's at the plate. Love that stuff, man. And that mind meld, that's real. I mean, that you're talking about that. John and I have been working together for so long now. I've told him years back already that I'm like, dude, I've developed this inner John. When I need to like consult you about something, I just ping it off of my inner John, and he does an okay job. It's not replicating the original, but it sometimes it works for the purpose.
Yeah, it's interesting even how that scales though. Because I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole here, but I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Triple Whale, and bringing this back to I think we B2B, B2C. It's a good time, and I think But let's talk about Triple Whale and what it does, and probably part of the reason why you wanted to go from working with ecom brands to working with Triple Whale, right? Or working in like make both the jump from ecom to SaaS and B2C to B2B, and take on this role of not really being an individual contributor anymore. Or maybe you didn't actually know that was going to happen. Like, I think that happens a lot. Like I used to work for this like chain of car dealerships. I was their marketing and like sales manager or sales guys, their best sales guy would get promoted to sales manager. And then he'd be horrible at it. And
horrible.
And you lost your best salesman.
Yeah, and you just lost your best salesman. And he's all mad at all the other salesmen because they can't make deals like it. And anyway, so maybe you didn't know that was going to happen, but like you chose to do all these things. And I'm guessing I know your answer here. My inner Rabah is saying that you did it because you like came across this product you really believe in. So let's talk about Triple Whale and like why it is so. Triple Whale is a sponsor of the show, but like, we're not trying to pitch here, but like, what is it about what this product does that you feel like solves a problem? Because what I think is that, and one of the biggest things I will say about the difference between ecom and SaaS is that you can actually grow pretty big in ecom without knowing a lot of things.
100%.
Like there was a time where you could grow pretty big in ecom without knowing what MER was.
100%.
People are probably watching this show like, okay, so what's MER? So like for real, like you could grow pretty big without knowing a lot of things because it was like, oh yeah, I have this, this pair of glasses and I run ads on Facebook or Google or whatever. And I tell people why they are so great and people come buy them and it's profitable. And so then I just buy more glasses and sell more of them. Well, and like, so to me, Triple Whale does a thing that like, it is very timely where like a lot of these founders get themselves in this situation where they're like, I blinked and I have like a legitimate company now. And I don't know a lot of things I'm supposed to know or need to know in order to run an e-commerce company, in order to do demand planning, in order to do all of the things that you need to do to run a physical product business. So I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit here, but I'm guessing that the reason you jumped is because you saw this product and you're like, wow, this is what the people I work with all the time need, and they don't know they need it.
Yeah. So it's actually kind of a trident of reasons. So it's threefold. One, definitely the product had to be awesome. And so the platform was incredible. Two, the founding team. So AJ, Max, and Yvonne were incredible, really awesome. And to be fair, we did a honeymoon period. So I came on for a couple months before I came on as full-time CMO. But the third, which is honestly more important than the first two. I love you, AJ Max, so maybe equally as important, but is timing. And so iOS 14 really blew up a lot of stuff. And so I think really timing is almost one of the number one functions of or the success of a business is really dependent on the timing of that business. If you're early or late, it doesn't matter if you have a great product. It doesn't matter if the market's not ready. it is what it is. And you're just going to, you know, languish there with this amazing product, almost as like this beautiful billboard in the desert. So it was kind of a combination of all three. And then quite frankly, like I'm 36, so I was definitely getting older. And so wanting to like be able to step right into a C-suite role was really appealing to me. And I kind of want to touch on something that you said there earlier too. The other thing that I'm realizing as I'm devouring like all this literature on business, on management, et cetera, the more I'm realizing is there is a difference between an executive and a manager. And then a manager is more so like, in a way, like a glorified PM. And I don't mean that like in a derogatory or a pejorative. It's just, they're more so keeping the trains on time, getting these things done, where an executive, you're not only a PM, you're basically all your direct reports are essentially PMs. And then you're thinking of strategy, and then you're thinking of politics, and then you're thinking of, to your point, kind of the power brokers. Where should I be speaking? Who should I be talking to? Who should I be aligning with? Who should I not piss off? Who's it okay to piss off? Like, there's a lot of things that go on there versus a manager is basically, let's make sure my team is putting out the things on time, at quality, at the velocity that my boss wants. So I do think there's a little distinguished there, but that's pretty much why I made the jump. The founding team, the timing, and the product was all really in alignment, where like, quite frankly, I was making really good money and I had way more control over my schedule than I do now, because I didn't have a boss. I mean, I had a boss, but my clients were my bosses, and they're, you know, it was just a little different where like AJ and Max called me at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I pick up the phone, we talk. And that's just a different shift, where it's like, before, you know, I worked when I wanted to work and I didn't work when I didn't want to work. And now, not only that, like I have people that depend on me. Like I have a team that I need to lead and I need to do this. And so, you know, there's a lot of pressure. And so that's different from me, where I used to be this kind of lone wolf ranger, where I basically just SEAL Team 6 and go in and crush it, you know, do the objective, get the money and get out. Where now it's like, there's people's livelihoods on the line and stuff. So there's just an elevation in responsibility, but you know, I was ready for that in my life, but it's definitely, now it's a lot easier, but for a while it's basically a one-man marketing department. So that's the weird thing about SaaS companies. Like before you find product market fit, the marketing department's kind of like the redheaded stepchild. Like every dollar goes towards engineering. Like can we hire better engineers? Can we hire more engineers? Marketing's like, yeah, do a blog post, or you know what I mean? Like the resources are very svelte. And now that we have, you know, thankfully found a pretty strong product market fit, we're about to close on a round. Like there's a lot of resources. My team's up to 4 people now. And if you're awesome and in Austin, hit me up. But so that has been helpful. And the thing I talk to when I talk to these other executives is it's just kind of nature of the beast. Like there's just a transition period of, it's going to be tough, you know, for 3 or 4 months, because there's no point in building a marketing department for a product that nobody wants. And so there's just this inflection point where it's like, you kind of got to just bite down on the mouthpiece and get through a few of these months. And then when you do, there can be, you know, a lot of upside, and it gets alleviated as you bring on a team. Like I said, I brought on a head of community, head of social, we're bringing on a head of content. So there's a lot of these people that have been just absolutely just killers. And it's been really a weight off my chest to have a lot of these kind of executional roles that are I'm kind of slicing them away from me. And now basically another way to put it is, when I have meetings, my whole goal is to not have any action items. I'm basically like a delegator, where it's like, okay, you get this, you get this, you get this, you get this. And that's just totally different than before. I'd go to meetings. It's like, okay, this is the action item, this action item. Okay, cool. Let's get this done. Let's get this done. Like that's not the world I live in anymore. And so that transition has definitely been, not that it wasn't expected, but there's a saying like, the map is not the territory. Like I knew, like I said, I read a lot of business books, a lot of business memoirs, like all these things. And like, I knew what was coming, but it's not real till it's real.
You know, yeah. Rabah, I can't speak on the behalf of the people whose like, you know, whose living kind of has depended on you over the years. But you sound a lot, when you're describing stuff like that about yourself, you'd sound like a lot like somebody I know pretty well for a few years now. That's how I viewed John, and he's really been that like pressure absorber in a lot of ways. His initiative and ambition is just like off the charts. If you know, the more you get to know him, the more you'll just see like, oh man, none of this is a show. John is the dude who thinks about just everything all the time. He doesn't sleep, as far as I know. I've never seen him asleep, I don't think. So
it's rumored. It's rumored that he sleeps, but you've never seen it.
Yeah. So I just wanted to air that out there and let you know that's probably what your employees think of you too. Sounds like you have enough ambition for a whole company. So,
well, thank you for that.
So yeah. Now, okay. One of the reasons and I have one more thing I want to kind of like hit on here, and then we'll do what we call a parting shot. Triple Whale itself. And I was kind of alluding to like product, you know what I mean? And like, that's kind of what I think, right? Like I figured you saw this and you're like, this is valuable, right? And ecom people don't know. They don't know they need this. And this is such a hard thing, right? When you service ecom businesses, right? Like we do as an agency, how often you come across founders that you're like, you don't know what you don't know. And I don't know if you're open to receiving it from me, you know? Yes. So in that sense, I could see like making that jump to Triple Whale being like, what if they aren't willing to accept, you know, that they need some of these things? But I want to just maybe briefly touch on what Triple Whale is, because we've talked about it. I don't know, briefly touch on what Triple Whale is. And then I want to maybe have your opinion, your opinion of ways or metrics or things that you look for in businesses that like a lot of ecom founders miss. You know, they don't know that they don't know how important this is to them, because I think there's like a lot of like, I don't know, not to get too nerdy, but like a lot of KPIs that maybe KPI is the wrong word for them. Maybe they're not a key performance indicator, but a lot of PIs, a lot of performance indicators, they get ignored that they don't even, because they don't even know about it, right? Like, yes. I mean, LTV is a huge one. Until 2021, nobody's talking about LTV. Nobody's, and that's like, how not, right? Like I had somebody on a call the other day ask me what LTV was, an ecom founder. It's lifetime value, right? But I'm like, how? Like that seems so important to me. But it's because I've had so many reps on so many ecom brands. And a lot of them have, like I said before, they got on this $10 million, $20 million run rate by being like, here's some glasses, here's some money on ads, boom, profitable, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. But maybe, hit on what Triple Whale is really quick, and maybe hit on some things that you have found, some things that a lot of brands are ignoring that you found to be very like valuable to look at.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for the tee up. So Triple Whale is ultimately, we're branding ourselves as the ecom OS. So it's just a platform where you can integrate all of your paid media and your business. So almost you can think of it as like a company brain, and it's just this nexus that you're plugging things into. So we have your Snapchat, your Pinterest, your TikTok, Facebook, your Google ads. We have reporting, we have customer insights. So we'll give you 3 AOVs, we'll give you cohorting, we'll give you 60, 90-day LTVs, customer journeys, all these things to understand the customer's preference set, preference value. And then our most used feature is the summary page, where you can build your own customized dashboard based on any metrics you want. You can blend those metrics. And then from that, if you do have the economics, we also offer an attribution play as well. So we have Triple Whale and then Triple Whale plus Pixel. And then ultimately you'll get with the Pixel is those campaign ad and ad set level. And so going back to the metrics that people care about, for me, after analyzing all these things, we've rolled up to kind of, we call it 3 ROAS to rule them all. But the first one is the MER ecosystem ROAS. So that's going to be your total sales over total ad spend. And so ultimately, I guess to roll back up another layer, as a media buyer, you care about 3 things. You care about effectiveness, you care about efficiency, and you care about profits. And that's a word. The P word is something that you haven't heard in a while either, because everybody's making so much money, right? Everybody's making so much money. Who cares when your gross profit is so high?
Yeah, if there's a bunch on the top line, there's got to be some on the bottom line.
Exactly. And that is something that you find, or like when I started out, I haven't heard anybody talking about profits ever. It was always top line watching, like what revenues are we doing? What revenues are we doing? But you can lose all that at the operational level. And so you just, anyways, I'm kind of getting in the weeds, but the 3 things I care about are, we call them 3 ROAS to roll them all. So it's that MER ecosystem ROAS. That's going to be the effectiveness of your ad spend. I care about new customer ROAS. So Shopify bifurcates their customers into new and returning. We just take the new customer revenue divided by total ad spend. That's going to be kind of the canary in the coal mine. Are you sowing the seeds of your field to reap them in the future? Because if not, what's going to happen is if you just watch MER, you can basically just reactivate old customers. And to John's point, there's going to be a ceiling on those people's LTV. Like there's only so much that customer is willing to give you. And if you just keep hammering those people, you're going to get to a point where you're going to wring a dry towel. So that's why the NC ROAS is really important. important. And then finally, profitability. Like not every dollar is created equal. So we created this metric called POAS, profit on ad spend. It's ultimately the contribution margin, but CMOAS doesn't really roll off the tongue. So we chose POAS. But ultimately, this is going to be your gross profit divided by total ad spend. And what that metric is going to tell you is, are you putting the ad dollars behind the right products to drive profitability for the business? Like paid media is expensive, especially now. And so paid media should be used on high margin, best selling products, not low margin products. Even if they are best sellers, use email, use other touch points that don't cost as much to sell those products. Not to say those are bad products, but again, we are using paid media. Paid media is expensive. Another way to think about it is, if this campaign did succeed, would you be happy? Like, if the answer is no, then why are you running that campaign? Like, then switch out the product. And a lot of times that's not on the business owner, that's on the media buyer, where the business owner is like, sell everything, where it's like, yeah, we can sell everything. But at the same time, there might be only one or two products in your, product set that are actually conducive with the economics to succeed on paid media. Let's just push those. Like, that's it. Those are the only products we're going to spend paid media on. And so again, you get into the, to John's point, the teacher will appear when the student is ready. So there's definitely some pushback that you'll get where it's like, well, this is our best selling product, we need to make revenue, blah, blah, blah. You're like, okay, that's fine. But again, you're selling into bad economics. And even if this did scale, you're going to lose money, because you have not only that, this is gross profit. Now you're going to take out operational expenses. You're going to have shipping. Like, there's all these things that are going to come out of this.
Or it needs to scale it like a 4X, that's not going to
happen. Yeah, exactly. It's just not feasible. And so that's what I would say kind of why Triple Whale is so helpful, is because you can kind of do all this stuff on a spreadsheet but what I found, because I actually came from like a GDS setup or a Google Data Studio setup. And basically that's when I came over, was AJ was courting me and we kind of were talking, and I was like, well, if you can beat my setup now, because I rolled my own. And then he finally did. And I was like, all right, this makes a lot of sense, because one of the things as builders that you don't remember is that, guess who supports the thing you built? You. And so if something breaks or something like that, it's terrible. And so being able to just give somebody money, and I get all the metrics that I care about in a really easy to digest manner. And then they're also pushing features out and doing all these things where it's like, I don't have to worry about that. That was kind of the big switch flip for me, where it's like, at a certain point, you need to concentrate on the highest value activity. And it wasn't rolling my own data studio, figuring out why Supermetrics broke, like all these things like that. I was like, dude, I'll just give Triple Whale money and it'll be fine. And I don't have to worry about anything. On top of that, there's a mobile app that I really slept on, where I did almost all my media buying or analysis, et cetera, from my desktop. And having all that data in your mobile app and being able to just peek into your marketing ecosystem was actually a lot more compelling than I gave it credit for at the beginning.
Nice. Okay. So one more segment on our show. We just a little teaser here. We're probably going to come back with a part 2 for Rabah, because this is such a good discussion, at least for me. Maybe other people are watching this and they're like, they're out. They're not even here anymore.
The wrap it up gift.
But I enjoyed this. Selfishly, the reason I do the podcast is so I can hear other people say smarter things than I know already and learn things. So we're probably going to do a part 2 here, where we play a little game with Rabah. A little, maybe a little Price is Right. I don't know. Who knows? If you watched our show before, you might know about Price is Right. But one thing we do on our show here is we do a parting shot, and I'm going to ramble a little bit here to give you a second. But the parting shot essentially is like, look at, based on the conversation we've had today, the thoughts it's triggered for you, the things that, we've talked about. If you were to sort of like give somebody the too long didn't read for this whole episode, of like, look, if you take one thing away today, if you watch this whole thing and you're like, oh yeah, that's a good point, I need to do that, I need to do this. Like, no, like, if you just take one thing away and really like make that a mindset, it doesn't have to be an action item, right? It could be an action item, it could be a mindset, it could be whatever. What is that? That's kind of the parting shot. And we'll kick it to you as the guest to sort of give us a parting shot on this episode.
Yeah, I love that. You have so many cool segments. I'm so jealous now. And to your other point, that's exactly why we started the podcast, where I can like non-creepily invite way smarter people than me to have a conversation.
Yeah.
So I love that. I think the parting shot would be, I'm going to cheat and actually do 2. One, it's understanding what the person's question is. And so I think everybody has a question. And so understanding what that stakeholder's question is, whether it is why aren't we making more money, or whether it is why our product's not selling, or what have you, there's always a question driving somebody, and figuring out what that question is. And then the other thing I would say is, what is your goal? Like, what is your ultimate, like, is the thing you're doing driving you towards the thing you care about? And if you find those two things out, a lot of the decisions become way easier because you have a priority set to reference. Whereas if not, like for me, for example, like I'm a really big obliger. I have a really hard time saying no to people. And so I have to build systems around that because I know that, and I'll just say yes to everything and I'll burn out. And so so that's what my parting shot would be. I would say, if you're, and it's almost in a meta level, it's not even just business, where it's like the people that you're interacting with and you care about, or that are stakeholders in your business agency, et cetera, understand what their question is. And then the second thing is, I guess in a weird way, it's understanding what your question is. Like, what are you trying to get done in this life, and what matters to you? And if the actions that you're doing aren't driving you towards that, then you need to recalibrate and figure out why not. And then, is it the goal that I'm going after that's wrong, or is it the current environment and the activities that I'm performing that's not getting me there?
To use what you say on your podcast all the time, I love that. Love that. No, that's true. Like we've said before on our podcast, like, if you're an entrepreneur, you got to build the business you want. You got to be sure about that, right? Because like, if you go and do this thing where you do this like bootstrap business and like build yourself into it, whatever, like maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you are a hustler. Maybe you are an operator, and it's like, yeah, maybe you should be raising money, and you should be like, that's what you should be doing, or you should be building a big business, or a bigger one than a lifestyle business, right? The passive income thing that always gets sort of like, hey, like you see this on your Facebook feed or your Instagram feed, like you can make money from the beach, right? Make that mailbox money. Some people are not wired that way. I'm not wired that way. Like if I didn't have anything to do all day, oh God. I mean, look, I love my family, but like, I got to have like something I'm driving for, right? Like that's me. So like, you got to build the thing you want, right? Like you said, know what your goal is. I love what you said about, like there's always a question driving everyone. I don't approach interactions that way, right? And so I like that. Like kind of approaching interactions like, what's the question that's probably driving this person right now, or within this interaction. It's awesome.
Beautiful.
Wow, guys, thank you for joining me on this episode. Rabah, it's been great meeting you. John, as always, a pleasure. Modern Commerce, thank you for joining us. If you've made it this far into the video, hopefully you enjoyed this episode of our podcast. And if you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell icon to get notifications about whenever we drop new videos in the future. And as always, until next time, we'll see you.